Horror Fanatic here, and I simply loved this movie. Not as much as the original, mind you, as I feel that film borderlines on perfection. I can't say the same for films 2, 3, and 4, which felt very discordant with the original for me due to their shift in tone. I had lofty expectations going into this film, as so many of the original key players have returned for. We have Robert Hislick returning as writer-director. We have Jonathan Turstyn, Paul D'Angelo, Felicia Rose, all reprising their roles from the original. Amazingly, Return to Sleepaway Camp really managed to deliver on my expectations. Not that this film is perfect, mind you, as the protagonist, Alan, is incredibly unlikable and is possibly a bigger bully than the bullies who bully him, as it feels like Alan's really asking for a lot of the torment he's getting. And sure, there might be some sort of learning disability or, social, mental issues going on here, but he's just an asshole. Also, the twist comes so far out of left field that I do have to call moderate amounts of bullshit. But with all the internal references to the original and more than a handful of sly references to the numbered sequels, Sleepaway Camp was really worth the time and energy involved. Return to Sleepaway Camp opens with one of the best opening credit scenes I've seen in a slasher in a long time. I love how the names pop out of the articles, giving instant attachment to the first film, something lacking in the numbered sequels. And also there's that rocking soundtrack. After that, the film takes pretty much an instant turn for the worst, as we get introduced to the main character and lead protagonist, Alan. Dear movie filmmakers, I'm not asking that you make every protagonist likable, or even doing bad things for the right reasons. Just make them relatable, and don't open them with a wet fart. After his ill-fated wet fart, Alan can't take the small amounts of fun being poked at him and really escalates the situation. By doing this, he kind of throws his hat into the ring as his own red herring, but he's so blamed as an option that he's never instantly regarded. And there's a few other sly moves that they show that it is not him. Though, look at this guy. That's the face of a man who can commit some violence. Though his fiery tantrum is quenched by the worst camp counselor, Randy. We'll see why he's such a terrible person later. The next day, at dinner, maybe lunch, it's hard to tell. They're eating mashed potatoes, fried chicken, and macaroni and cheese. So, that seems like a dinner meal. Alan decides he doesn't want these things and throws his mashed potatoes at Pee-Pee, again, showing that he's an asshole and a bully, possibly worse than he himself is treated. Though, I will admit, Randy does go a little overboard. We're also introduced to the sheriff, who tries to give a discussion about cancer with mixed results, though largely I'd say it was a success. Then we get shown that Alan is a huge fucking manipulator as he gets his fucking way, and goes to the kitchen. In the kitchen, we get introduced to Charlie, played by Isaac Hayes, motherfucking Gandalf Fitch himself.
Well, look who's here. Count Problem Child.
Hey, Charlie.
Though, don't get attached to this character, he goes as quickly and quietly as he comes. We also meet the secondary cook, Mickey, who fills the same role as the head chef from the first film. He's a creeper that hits on campers, he's an asshole, and he dies quickly. And in fact, will be the first one too, just here shortly. Mickey gives Alan the option of 2 different food choices, to which Alan wants neither, and steals ice cream that he was specifically told to stay away from. Admittedly, Mickey's a bit of an asshole about this, but nothing about Mickey says he's anything but one. However, Alan escalates this to the point of violence, and he gets away with it.
Let me go! You all suck! I hope you die!
It's at this point I really have to question why they keep this kid around. Alan's more attractive, more popular, cooler stepbrother Mickey is sent to go after him after he flees from the kitchen. He manages to track him down, but is unable to get him to come back.
I'm not going back, Michael! Ever! Everyone's always picking on me!
And once again, Alan escalates the level of violence in the scene very quickly. Now, I have to stop here and give kudos to this scene. There are a few of them that are extremely well shot in my opinion, that deliver a great amount of character and ambiance and are just well shot scenes, and this is one of them. Next we get our first kill, the camp cook, Mickey, who's killed in a fashion that I find very reminiscent of the cook from the first film, being basically cooked alive. Whereas the first cook was boiled, Mickey gets his head stuffed into a deep fryer. Then he gets his body tossed into a trash compactor, which feels very much like a callback to Sleepaway Camp 3. That night, Alan is once again an asshole to Pee-Pee, so, that way you don't feel bad for him at all when he gets picked on here in a second.
Oh my God!
Do you really think that I forgot what you did to me at dinner tonight? Do you?
It hurts!
That's the point, ass face!
But I'm in the mood for is a
Hey, PC. Have a nice trip.
fuck you, Bella.
This, of course, causes him to freak out, and he's told to leave. Again. And something that he doesn't do. Again. Instead, he sneaks backstage and accepts drugs from kids he doesn't know, making me think that maybe this kid is just an idiot. Turns out the weed that Weed supplied him with wasn't the good stuff. Heck, it wasn't even the bad stuff. As these two have a history of rolling up cow shit and tricking campers into smoking it. How does anyone accept anything from these two guys anymore? You think after the first time it happened, word would have gotten around and people would know just to not do this. Anyway, Alan starts coughing up a lung when two other campers, who I'm just going to stop remembering their names now, since at this point it basically becomes Alan versus the whole camp.
What's going on here? What happened to him?
What do you think happened? When are you going to do something about this?
Shit, okay, I guess it's him and Petey versus the world. Anyway, story at hand. Due to his coughing spree against a man's crotch, he is given the nickname Blowjob, a name that he very much dislikes. That night, down by the water, Weed is killed after a smoke out by having a hose of gasoline stuffed down into his stomach, and then being lit on fire with an anti-drug message, which leaves me feeling once again like this is a callback to one of the numbered sequels, this one being to the Shit Sisters in Sleepaway Camp 2. It goes without saying that his friend Stan doesn't take it that well. A week later, life at camp has returned to normal. Wait, a week? How long are summer camps for? Apparently summer camps last like 6 to 8 weeks sometimes. Alright, let's go. Alan, who is still an asshole, wrecks a croquet game to force the girl he likes, Karen, to go to his private secret place with him. She eventually agrees, but only if her friend Mary can come along, to which he readily agrees to her terms and conditions. The sheriff goes to see Ricky after being tipped off to him about him by Ronnie. He goes to question about Angela, and my main takeaway from the scene is that Ricky still loves his cousin. For all the bad things Angela has done, he still loves her and is the only person who sees her, and he sees her fairly regularly. Karen and Mary go to Alan's secret place, which could have worked for his benefit if, maybe clean shirt or non-flat soda from not dirty dishes, something to do. Instead, skin frogs rain from the sky, and the girls understandably assume that's what he does out there, and freak out and peace out, allowing the real culprit, Michael, to reveal himself. Alan takes off after Karen to explain to her that it was actually Michael, and things spiral for him quickly out of control and ends with him being wedgied on the dock, facilitated by that shitty camp counselor, Randy. This scene here also plays out a bit like the first film for me, when Angela's thrown in the water. Karen gets pressured by TC and some of her fellow campers to play another cruel joke on Alan. Like, he's had a lot of these coming, but this one, he certainly didn't. She lures him backstage for a game of spin the bottle, which he has more than a couple of red flags too that should have tipped him off. First off, I've never been in a game of spin the bottle that's played in the dark. Maybe they're playing by East Coast rules. He gets attacked and stripped down and forced on stage in front of the rest of the camp in just his underwear and blindfolded, which is a pretty horrible situation to put anyone in. For me, this is where Return to Sleepaway Camp starts to get really good, because unlike other reviewers, I actually really like the kills in this film. Frank, the camp owner, gets killed by having a bird cage put around his head and rats put into it who burrow their way out, which is so gross. Karen recognizes that the joke she pulled was cruel and feels bad about it, which absolves her of enough guilt to be able to survive this film. Randy gets killed next in the most convoluted way possible. Randy and Linda go to the woods to hook up. Remember I said he was a bad camp counselor? He sends her back to the Jeep to get the beer, so I don't understand why he thinks it's her that ties him to a tree, and also, how does this loop drop down out of nowhere?
Fuck, that hurt!
Followed by a... followed by getting a noose from fishing line tied around his penis. Linda, while returning, hears Randy screaming and sees a masked killer approaching, assuming it's Alan, jumps in the vehicle and flees. Turns out the end of the fishing line is tied to the bumper of Randy's Jeep, so when Linda takes off, she actually ends up severing his dick. And she also runs face first into barbed wire strung up by the killer. I'm not sure how the killer knew that she was going to go right rather than left, or even why she didn't duck when she saw the barbed wire coming. Either way, great shot. TC dies next by getting a wooden spike to the eye. This, honestly, he had coming. If you managed to dodge the first blow from a spike coming through the floor, I would always recommend against looking through the hole it came through. And should you be so unfortunate to make that decision and get stabbed in the eye, under no circumstances freak out and ram the end of the spike into the wall, pushing it through your head. And this is the part where bodies start getting found, starting with Frank's. Just look at it. So cool. Bella gets killed when she returns to her bunk, and she's killed in a Iron Maiden bunk bed panini press fashion, which honestly is probably the weakest kill in the whole film. Michael and Karen learn of TC's murder, and Karen understandably freaks out. She runs to tell the members of her bunk about it when she and Mary come across Bella's body, which really pushes Karen into the deep end. While Karen's trying to piece the fuck out, something that she does fail at, Mary starts telling everyone that the killer is Alan.
Stop saying that.
But she doesn't. It's at this point that Ricky shows back up, claiming to have been called by the officer, while the officer claims that he never made the call. While running through the woods, Karen comes across both Randy and Linda, both alive, and chooses to help neither of them. But, once again, here's one of the shots that I really like in this film of Linda's face being revealed by panning slowly around Karen's head. It's just, I love it. Karen is caught by the killer at this point because she just simply sees him and faints. But, since Karen feels remorse, and she says she's sorry, The plot lets her live as she's rescued by both Michael and then shortly thereafter the sheriff. Michael arms up and goes after Alan and finds him at his special frog place. How was this not the first place they looked for him? I mean, Karen, Mary, Michael, this other douche have all been there, so it's not like it's that big of a secret place anymore. Michael attacks Alan, viciously beating with a croquet mallet. This attack reminds me a lot of Mel Caustic's attack on Ricky in the first film. But before he can end a decisive killing blow, he's stopped by the actual killer. The killer reveals himself as soon as Ronnie, Ricky, and this female camper arrives. And surprise, it's Angela, who's been masquerading as the cop the whole time. I'm going to have issues with this, we're going to get there. It's also really revealed that she skinned Michael alive in the same fashion that he skinned the frogs. That's not the end though. Luckily we get one final kill, as it shows and explains kind of how Angela got the policeman's uniform and identity, and that was by dropping a car on his face. Like I said, I loved this film as a return to form for the series.
Your ass stinks.
As Return has a much darker tone than the others, and
Your ass stinks.
I'll admit there's some flaws that should have been addressed, and that...
Your ass stinks.
Alright, Return hasn't been the subject of much praise, and the reason for this is simply twofold. First and foremost, with the exception of Ricky, Pee-wee, Petey, Ronnie arguably, that there's no likable characters in this film. Everyone's a bully in one way or another, and all of them kind of get the shit that comes their way. Also, Return to Sleepaway Camp came out in 2008, making me ask, are sleepaway camps and summer camps even still a thing? Apparently, still a thing. The other issue is Angela is really shoehorned in at the end in this really weak reveal as the officer, which brings up way more questions than it settles. Like, who was the cop that Angela killed at the end of the credits? Why is no one looking for that guy? How did she get hired to talk about cancer at this camp, which I'm sure there was checks and stuff and like official channels they went through. Like, where did Angela get the car at the end? Where did Angela get those clothes? Though they do give clues that the officer is indeed Angela the whole time. Mostly I'm going to have to point heavily to the scene where he questions Ricky. Going back and rewatching this scene with the foreknowledge that this is Angela adds a much more nuanced level of conversation to this. It actually does open up the idea of gender politics once again influencing this character. But other than those two honestly minor flaws, this is a great film and one of the best sleepaway camps in my opinion. While Pamela Springsteen's performance is notable in its own right, as she has starred as the character in just as many films as Felicia Rose, I do think the ones with Felicia Rose are the better films. And by extension, the better slashers. Final thoughts. Once again, I loved this film. But it does have a few flaws that really just make it okay at the end of the day. The setting is refreshing, as it feels much more like they're at an actual sleepaway camp or a summer camp than it did in the other three films. The setting was refreshing, and it felt, even as I've never been to one, that it was more of an actual summer camp than compared to the film's 2, 3, and 4's depictions. I also liked that the kills were inventive, and the kills were actually a lot of fun given the fact that you don't like any of the victims. So there's always a certain sense of comeuppance and cathartic release. So, Return to Sleepaway Camp. It's a great fun, it's a fun slasher, and I heavily recommend it. Until next time, I'm Workman.